2 lines that changed everything for Talia. When her own mother called to uninvite her from Thanksgiving, she had no idea her sister's new husband was hiding a secret that would soon destroy their family dinner forever. 2. My name is Talia and I'm 26 years old. I can still recall the exact moment when everything in my family quietly crumbled, just days before Thanksgiving. It all began with a phone call from my mother, her voice strangely cold, the kind of tone people use when they've already made up their mind about you. I was standing in my apartment kitchen, staring at the grocery list I had been preparing for the trip home, when she said something that made my heart sink. My mother said, "You won't be at Thanksgiving this year. Your sister's new husband thinks you'd ruin the vibe." For a few seconds, I genuinely thought I had misheard her. Ruin the vibe? I asked her what she meant, but she just sighed, as if she were already exhausted by a conversation that hadn't even really begun. She explained that my sister's new husband, Ethan, felt uncomfortable around me, and since this would be his first Thanksgiving with the family, they didn't want any drama. Drama? I barely even knew the man. I had met him exactly twice, once at their rushed wedding dinner, and once at a brief family brunch where he barely spoke to me. And yet, somehow, I had already become the problem. I stood there gripping my phone while my mother kept explaining things as if it were perfectly reasonable to uninvite your own daughter from a holiday gathering. She said it would only be this year, and that maybe next year things would feel different. But what hurt the most wasn't even the excuse itself. It was how easily everyone seemed to go along with it. My sister hadn't called me. My father hadn't called me. It was as if they had all quietly decided that I no longer belonged at the table. That heavy, familiar feeling washed over me, the one I'd carried since childhood. The feeling of being the odd one out in my own family. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, to demand what exactly Ethan had said about me. But the truth was, I already knew how those conversations went. If I pushed back, they'd say I was proving his point. So instead, I did the one thing no one expected. I said nothing. I simply told my mother I understood and ended the call. That night, I sat alone in my apartment with the silence pressing in around me. Outside, the city was already glowing with early holiday lights, but inside my chest, everything felt dark and hollow. I kept replaying those words in my mind, "You won't be at Thanksgiving this year." It sounded less like a request and more like a verdict. Eventually, anger began to replace the sadness. Who was Ethan to decide whether I belonged in my own family? And more importantly, why were they letting him? I tried to recall our brief interactions. At the wedding dinner, he had watched me strangely when I mentioned where I worked, like the information had caught him completely off guard. At brunch, he had asked me a few careful questions about my job, my office, my position. Questions that felt less like curiosity and more like he was trying to confirm something. At the time, I had brushed it off as awkward small talk. But now, lying awake in the darkness, I wondered if there had been something else in his expression. Something like recognition. Or fear. The more I thought about it, though, the less sense it made. I hadn't done anything to this man. I didn't even know him well enough to offend him. By midnight, I had convinced myself to stop caring. If my family didn't want me there, fine. I'd make my own plans for Thanksgiving. I'd cook something simple, maybe watch movies, maybe even take a short trip somewhere quiet. I told myself I was okay with it, but deep down, the rejection still stung like a fresh bruise. The next morning, I went to work determined to push the whole thing out of my mind. My office building downtown was already buzzing when I walked in, the usual morning rush of employees, ringing phones, the smell of coffee drifting through the halls. Work had always been the one place where things felt steady and predictable. I liked that. I liked being someone people relied on instead of someone they excluded. I had just settled at my desk and opened my laptop when my assistant knocked lightly on my door. She looked a little confused. "Talia," she said carefully, "there's a man in reception asking for you. He says it's urgent." I frowned. I wasn't expecting any meetings that morning. "Did he give a name?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "Ethan." My stomach tightened instantly. What was my sister's husband doing here? For a moment, I wondered if something had happened to my sister or my parents, but my assistant didn't look worried, just puzzled. I stood up, smoothed my jacket, and walked out toward reception, my thoughts racing with questions. When I turned the corner and saw him standing there, he looked nothing like the calm, polite guy I had met at the wedding. He looked tense, almost panicked. The second his eyes landed on me, his face went pale, like he had just seen a ghost. For a split second, neither of us moved. Then suddenly, everything exploded at once. His chair scraped loudly against the floor as he shot to his feet, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. And right there, in the middle of my office reception area, with employees turning to watch in confusion, he started screaming. Because the moment Ethan saw me standing in the reception area of my office, his entire body froze like he had just walked into a nightmare he never expected to see. For a second, the whole room went silent, except for the faint humming of computers and the distant ringing of phones. Then suddenly, his chair screeched backward as he jumped to his feet, staring at me with wide, panicked eyes. And right there, in front of my staff and half the people waiting in the lobby, he started screaming because he had just realized exactly who I was. No, this can't be right, he muttered at first, shaking his head as if trying to wake himself up from a bad dream. But when I stepped a little closer, confused and trying to understand what was happening, his panic only grew worse. You work here?" he blurted out, his voice cracking. I frowned. "Yes, I do. Why are you here?" The receptionist, my assistant, and several employees were staring between us, clearly sensing something strange unfolding. Ethan looked around the office lobby again, noticing the company logo on the wall, the security badges, the staff quietly watching us. His breathing grew faster, and suddenly his voice dropped into a whisper that sounded almost horrified. "You're Talia. Talia Morgan, the compliance director." I blinked. Yes. The moment I confirmed it, his face completely drained of color. His hands began shaking so badly, he had to grab the back of the chair beside him. And then he said the one sentence that made the entire situation make sense. "Oh my God. Your sister didn't know." But what Ethan didn't realize yet was the part that truly terrified him. I looked him straight in the eyes and said calmly, "Ethan, the investigation already connected the dots last week." His face completely collapsed. "What?" "Your company name came up in a financial audit. We've already pulled the records." He looked like the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. His voice dropped into a desperate whisper. "You're going to report it." I didn't answer immediately. I simply studied him. The man who had convinced my own family to exclude me just to protect himself. The man who thought pushing me away would stop the truth from catching up with him. Finally, I spoke. "That depends on what the records show," I said evenly. "But I suggest you start preparing for some very serious questions." At that moment, Ethan looked less like a confident new husband and more like a man realizing the consequences of his choices were already closing in. He had come to my office that morning hoping to confirm whether I was the same Talia he feared. Instead, he had walked straight into the worst possible confirmation. After a long silence, he nodded weakly, muttered a quiet apology, and walked out of the lobby, looking like someone heading toward a storm he couldn't escape. The moment the doors closed behind him, my assistant turned to me slowly with wide eyes. "Do I even want to know what that was about?" she asked. I exhaled and shook my head with a faint smile. Not today. But later that evening, sitting alone again in my apartment, I thought about the strange twist of fate. My family believed I was the one who would ruin Thanksgiving. But the truth was, the only reason Ethan was afraid of me was because he already knew what he had done. And sometimes, the truth has a way of showing up exactly where people least expect it. What started as a family betrayal turned into something none of them saw coming. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more amazing content.